Here we see three examples of species who have had trouble keeping their population numbers up in Pennsylvania. When we say that a species is endangered, what we mean is that it's in danger of extinction throughout all or a significant portion of its natural range. If scientific studies have led us to the conclusion that one species may become endangered in the near future, we refer to it as a threatened species. There's also a few vocabulary words for very special cases that you might want to know. So the least shrew is a locally endangered species. It's endangered in Pennsylvania, but there are other populations that might be healthy elsewhere. The reason why it's locally endangered has to do with habitat fragmentation, which is a less extreme form of habitat destruction, but it still reduces this population's ability to use their natural ecosystem. In the center, we see a picture of a piping plover, and this is a kind of bird that buries its eggs in sandy beaches. Now, it would be weird to say that there are a lot of sandy beaches in Pennsylvania, but actually, because of the Great Lakes region, we do have a few areas where these birds can survive. Unfortunately, the Great Lakes are also a popular destination for tourists, so unbeknownst to these tourists that were taking a stroll along the beach, often they ended up crushing the nests of these piping plovers, and if a population cannot replace itself, well, then it's going to decline in population size over time. And this ultimately led to the piping plover becoming an extirpated species, a locally extinct species in Pennsylvania. On the far right, we have a peregrine falcon, but this equally could be just about any large predatory bird in the United States. They had a sharp population decline in the 1970s due to the use of a pesticide called DDT. Now, DDT was supposed to be safe in the quantities that we were using it to spray on our crops. It was a very effective pesticide, according to all accounts. But as organisms were feeding on vegetation that had this pesticide on it, or they were eating the insects that were eating the vegetation that had the pesticide on it, or they were eating the organisms that ate the insects that ate the vegetation that had the pesticide on and on and on and on, at each higher trophic level, the concentration of DDT increased. So organisms that were secondary consumers had a higher amount of DDT in their tissues than organisms that were primary consumers. Organisms that were tertiary consumers had a higher amount of DDT still, and organisms that were apex predators, like a lot of predatory birds, peregrine falcon included, had the highest levels of DDT in their system. The presence of DDT in these birds didn't just make them sick, it actually altered some key elements of their physiology. Specifically, it caused the eggs that they were laying to have thinner shells. And the first thing you learn about bird biology when you're in kindergarten is that birds incubate their eggs by sitting on them. So the mother birds were sitting on these nests with thinner shells and weaker shells, and they were crushing the eggs in the nest. In the evolution section, we talked about the idea that organisms want to replace themselves in the population. They want to pass their genes on to the next generation. And those organisms that are successful reproducers are going to be represented more in the next generation. They're going to have more copies of their gene. But DDT was causing a decrease in that replacement rate for all members of the species simultaneously, and across many, many different species. Bald eagles are another example of a bird that was affected by DDT, and we started noticing that overall bird populations were just declining in the 1960s. And this caused Rachel Carson to publish a book called Silent Spring in 1962, and that was pretty much the catalyst for the American environmental movement. We all started banding together and realizing that if we didn't take action against this kind of pollutant out in the ecosystem, that we were going to lose some very important species, including the symbol of America, the bald eagle. Most big environmental laws in the United States were made in the 1970s, under the Nixon administration as a matter of fact, so it wasn't all bad with him. However, even with these laws in place, habitat loss and biodiversity loss has continued, albeit slower than it would have, but still we are losing species daily. And now there is a concerted effort to eliminate environmental protections, indeed to eliminate science from policymaking decisions whatsoever. But this is Bio 100, and if you want me to rant about that, you should take my Humans in the Environment class. I believe I mentioned in some of the earlier videos a few of the human-caused factors that decrease biodiversity, but now we're going to go through them one by one. The main ways in which humans affect biodiversity is through habitat destruction, overusing resources, pollution, introducing invasive species, and overharvesting economically valuable organisms. And make no mistake, Each of us is contributing to all of these factors. When I was a kid, there was a cartoon called Captain Planet, and it really made it appear as though the people who were responsible for environmental damage was just a small group of bad actors, and you know who they were because they dressed like supervillains. But while that is a comforting narrative to tell yourself, the truth is that most of these effects that we're going to discuss are a byproduct of our collective lifestyles. Which is not to say that all of the blame is on us as individuals. Large companies and social systems have simply made it easier for us to live unsustainably. And that's a word you're going to hear me say a lot in this unit. So, sustainability. Sustainability is the goal of developing, managing, and conserving Earth's resources in ways that meet the needs of people today, but without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. One way in which we can live more sustainably is to preserve natural ecosystems, which also preserves the ecosystem services of those areas and the biodiversity contained within. Human alteration of habitats poses the single greatest threat to biodiversity throughout the biosphere. Agriculture, urban development, forestry, mining, and environmental pollution have brought about massive destruction and fragmentation of habitats. Deforestation continues at a blistering pace in tropical and coniferous forests. The amount of land surface altered by people is approaching 50%, and we use more than half of all accessible surface and fresh water, which I'll talk about a little bit more later on. Worldwide, tens of thousands of dams constructed for flood control, hydroelectric power, drinking water, and irrigation have damaged river and wetland ecosystems. Some of the most productive aquatic habitats in estuaries and intertidal wetlands have been overrun by commercial and residential development. Mining coal used to mean digging mines and going through a series of tunnels in order to find the correct veins and harvest it out that way, which was problematic for its own reasons, but nowadays mining coal means strip mining, mountaintop removal, where a small team of workers can actually completely clear out the entire landscape in order to get every little scrap of coal that's in there, and that's pretty dramatic habitat destruction. A staggering number of acres of rainforest ecosystem is cleared annually in order to make room for more pasture for grazing cattle and for palm oil plantations. Palm oil is a cheap vegetable oil that you find in a lot of different products, cosmetics, detergents, snack foods, that kind of thing. On this slide, you can see a side-by-side satellite image of an area of Brazil called Rondônia in 1975 versus 2001. The image that you're seeing has about 200,000 square kilometers of rainforest, but by 2003, about 70,000 kilometers of rainforest had already been cleared. In the 10 years that followed 2003, the annual loss of rainforest actually dropped off pretty substantially, but it never hit zero, so cumulatively we have continued to lose rainforest ecosystem ever since. And I would expect the rate of deforestation in Brazil to increase in the near future, as Brazil's newly elected president, Mr. Bolsonaro, referred to the wish to preserve the Amazon rainforest as a, and this is a direct quote, form of environmental psychosis. And he has promised to increase the level of commercial exploitation of the Amazon rainforest in order to stimulate Brazil's economy. The Amazon rainforest stores a truly astounding amount of carbon, and when the forest is cleared and burned, that carbon is released into the atmosphere. So the destruction of the Amazon could end up being a catastrophic environmental disaster. What was it I was just saying about Captain Planet villains not really existing? Anyway, back to what I was talking about. A habitat doesn't have to be 100% obliterated in order for the biodiversity in that area to decline. Sometimes it could just be degraded or modified. And sometimes when this happens, it's entirely unintentional. We even have the best intentions. So for a very long time, the U.S. Forest Service had a policy of forest fire prevention, forest fire suppression. Never let any forest fire burn. Fire is obviously very destructive, so why would we allow any forest fires to burn? But what we started to realize was that forest fires are a very natural part of the ecosystem. Periodically, forest fires come through, and these ecosystems have evolved with that factor in mind. So, when we were preventing every forest fire from burning, what happened is the underbrush grew up very thick and dense at the base of these trees, and that decreased the mobility of certain organisms. So, for example, the red-cockaded woodpecker needs clear flight paths in order to move from tree to tree. And since its mobility was decreased by all this underbrush, its population started to go down. It couldn't look for mates, it couldn't root around for insects. Everything was harder for this woodpecker, and surviving in a natural habitat is hard enough without that extra little factor. So even something as well-intentioned as stopping forest fires can have a negative ecological effect. Nowadays, what we do is prescribed burns. We go to a section of forest and we cut down a perimeter of trees around that area, and then we set a small fire, which we then contain and put out when it's run its course. This way we get that natural fire coming through, but we can monitor it and make sure that it doesn't spread to nearby housing developments or spread into other ecosystem areas. Controlled burns. The other nice side effect of this system is that we clear out all of that underbrush, and that underbrush acts as kindling for wildfires. So when wildfires do get started up, they don't have this massive buildup of fuel to really make them hot, strong, big burns, and they're much more manageable as a result. Another major threat to biodiversity is overexploitation of wildlife by harvesting at rates that exceed the ability of populations to rebound. That is, we're taking species out of ecosystems faster than they can repopulate. Overharvesting has threatened some rare trees that produce valuable wood, such as mahogany and rosewood. The population of some animal species have been reduced to near extinction as a result of overharvesting by commercial entities, or poaching, or just sport hunting. Examples include tigers and whales and Galapagos tortoises and a lot of fish. In parts of Africa, Asia, and South America, a lot of animals that you might not expect are heavily hunted for what we call bush meat. As once impenetrable forests are open to exploitation, the commercial bushmeat trade has become one of the greatest threats to primates, including gorillas, chimpanzees, and many species of monkeys. And that's not to mention other species of mammals and birds. No longer hunted solely for local use, large quantities of bushmeat are sold at urban markets or exported worldwide to countries which include the United States. Here on the slide you can see a tiger pelt and a large pile of ivory which was seized by government organizations trying to crack down on poaching. Frequently the image of poachers that we are presented with are poor farmers whose cattle are being threatened by a tiger, so they go out and they hunt the tiger and then they can sell that pelt for money. But by and large, that is not what is going on when we are talking about poaching. Make no mistake, poachers are members of large, well-organized criminal cartels that sell animal parts for millions of dollars worldwide. Now, to be clear, not all examples of overharvesting are the result of poaching. Commercial fisheries have had to go further offshore and drag their nets deeper and deeper in order to find fish because they've been depleting those resources as well. A question you could reasonably ask is it even possible to remove organisms from the environment at a rate which is sustainable? And the answer is yes. But we're going to have to put a pin in that question until we get into the population ecology section a little bit later on. Overexploitation is not a problem which is limited to biotic resources in an ecosystem. The abiotic resources, for example water, can be used at a faster rate than it is replenished as well. In order to build a city in the Nevada desert, we created Lake Mead, the largest man-made water reservoir in the United States. And the water in Lake Mead is used to make Las Vegas a good deal greener, creating lawns and golf courses and swimming pools and everything you can imagine. On this satellite photo, you can see the increase in green coverage in Las Vegas from May 1973 to May 2000. This greening requires a profound amount of water, and Lake Mead has been gradually depleting over the past few years. As of 2017, the reservoir was only at 40% capacity and falling. Water is a somewhat paradoxical resource in that it is simultaneously abundant and scarce. It's abundant in the sense that the majority of the Earth's surface is covered in oceans. We have lots and lots of water. but it's scarce in the sense that not a great deal of that water is fresh water. We can only drink water that is below a certain salt content, and the way that we get that is that it evaporates from the ocean, is carried over land, and then it rains down in the form of precipitation, and it becomes surface water, lakes and rivers and reservoirs, and then eventually it infiltrates into groundwater, and we can get it through wells as well. However, that surface water, that fresh water, is only a very tiny fraction of Earth's water supply. In total, only 3% of Earth's water is fresh water, and of that 3%, the vast majority, is frozen up in glaciers. In total, we only have 3% of 3% to work with. In other words, only 0.09% of Earth's water is available for use in agriculture, for use in drinking, for use in public swimming pools, for use in washing your clothes, for use in hydroelectric power plants, for use in making cola, or any other industrial process. And this is the same water that would be found in aquatic ecosystems like lakes and wetlands and streams and all that kind of thing. Water everywhere, and not a drop to drink. Today, over 900 million people do not have access to safe drinking water. We call this the water scarcity problem. And the combined effects of population growth and lifestyle inflation have caused the consumption rate of water to double every 20 years. That's twice the rate of population growth. Now, even those freshwater resources that we do have are under threat from climate change and pollution. As the climate changes, some areas that were already dry are going to get less precipitation, exacerbating the problem of water scarcity. As the climate continues to change, some areas are going to get all of their rainfall for the entire year in a much shorter period of time, and less of it is going to have a chance to infiltrate into groundwater. So even though they're getting the same amount of precipitation, it's not going to recharge their wells. And then through pollution, some of the standing water that we do have can become unusable. I'll talk more about pollution in the next video, but it's good to keep in mind that when we're talking about sustainable resource management, about living more sustainably, we're not just talking about preserving ecosystems, we are talking about improving the lives of humans worldwide.
Your powers combine. I am Captain Planet.